Probably pretty good. I mean, I know the main the main topic today is the manager rook stuff. I think we have most people here for that discussion at least. Or if we get anyone from the dashboard side, maybe not.
Yeah. With this topic, I think there's a bunch of people that we really should have to go in depth around it from dashboard, like you said, um, and I didn't give people notice that I'd be bringing up the topic here, but I thought I'd maybe could give a preview to the topic. We could talk through it as much as people want to, but I think if we really need to spend a good hour on it with the appropriate folks. So if we spend time briefly on it today and cover it next week, or if we want to just go through it today and next week, uh, I'm open, or call a separate meeting. So anyway, so I'll give an overview of the thoughts around this, unless there's any other questions before we get started. All right, I'll go for it. So the manager module for Rook was created, 3 or 4 years ago, and the idea behind it was, of course, that we'd have a common um, interface, orchestrator interface, to work with the different orchestrators. And now we're down to those being Ceph ADM and Rook. And the challenge has always been that Rook, when running in Kubernetes, really does things differently than other platforms like Ceph ADM. And so some of the orchestrator APIs then just don't make sense for Rook. Or the dashboard may need to have a slightly different experience for Kubernetes clusters, or lots of questions around this. So the question is, what should we be doing for the Rook Manager module? Should we be putting effort into it? And is it worth it, or is there maybe a different approach we should be taking, especially with dashboard integration? And there's a lot of questions around that area. Because this was kind of spurred by a month or two ago when Joseph created a blog, and he was about to post the blog, getting feedback on it about the manager module. And is Joseph here? I don't see him today. So, and nicely written, but then it's like, wait, do we want to tell people about the Rook Manager module because is it really supported? Is it really something we want people to use, or do we want to back up um, and have do something differently and not officially support it? Because upstream, we don't see people using it really. They want to use the dashboard for many scenarios, like monitoring, but they're just not using it for things that they can use the CRDs for managing their desired state.
Just to refresh memory, this is an upstream meeting?
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to, just want to make sure I don't say anything I shouldn't say. So yes. All right. I always have to check.
Yeah. And with that in mind, maybe we should call a separate meeting to talk about downstream too.
But yes, because I just want context, so I've got to be a little careful.
Probably. Well, in any case, I think that the thing is that it's being recorded, okay? But everybody here is from Red Hat, I think. Just to add some points, okay, to what Travis has pointed out, I think that he has do a very good summary in the document, okay. But I think that this is the second time that we have a meeting about more or less the same topic, okay? It is worth to continue with the Rook Manager Orchestrator. And the previous time, it was, I think, that 1 year ago, and it seems that everybody wants to do that, to continue with that. But I think that the reality is showing us a different situation, okay? And I think that the main problem that we have with the orchestrator module is that we have tried to follow the orchestrator API for Rook, okay? And what we have found is that the environment that we have, the platform that we have behind, is not the same. It's not. It is not compatible with the same API endpoints that we are going to use, that we use for Ceph ADM. Okay, the orchestrator API, the beginning of this orchestrator and the design of the API was thinking in, we want to have a common API to use different kind of tools, that all these tools are going to act over a platform that is a parameter cluster, okay, with access to the device, to the hardware and the infrastructure, okay. And the problem is that, okay, the orchestrator API could be valid for this situation, but if we change completely the end platform, in this case using Kubernetes, well, what we are seeing, and this is something that is is being demonstrated every month, okay, in the last 2 years, is that this API is not good in order to provide the functionality that we need to have in Kubernetes environments with Ceph clusters deployed in Kubernetes environments. The first problem I see that is that, for example, in the current API, we are there are, I think that 50% of the effort has been done in trying to provide a Ceph cluster and to install a Ceph cluster from scratch. Okay? And this is something that is completely different in the Kubernetes environment. In the Kubernetes environment, this is done using a CRT with a structure, okay? And the people that wants to deploy Ceph clusters in Kubernetes environments, they want, in any case, what they want is something that could make easy the customization of this file. But what we have is completely different, okay? Because our approach is thinking that we have behind hardware, an infrastructure cluster that is different from what the Kubernetes platform is offering us. So this is the first problem. So 50% of the functionality that we have in the orchestrator is focused in day one operations, and we do not need these operations in Kubernetes environments, because Rook is providing this. Or if we want to provide, to make easy these day one operations, we need to do that in a different way. Second part, we have the rest of functionality for day two operations, okay? And even in this case, things are very different, because in Ceph ADM, well, we have tried to provide a desired state of the things, but it's a desired state of the things very light, okay, and not really well tested, okay. So we are not in the same shape that we can find in Kubernetes clusters. In Kubernetes clusters, it's more easy to well, it's a decided state platform, okay, and it's a platform built around this concept. And in Ceph ADM, we do not have the same level of quality, functionality, and possibilities. So again, what we have in the orchestrator now is something that is not similar to what we have in Kubernetes cluster. If we want to change, for example, the shape, the kind of, for example, the number of diamonds of this type, or change the configuration, is different in Kubernetes and different in Ceph ADM. And the last part is, okay, let's go to the part of management commands of the cluster in order to do any kind of Ceph command, okay? Well, in this case, we can simulate the functionality in both places, but this is, I think, that only a 10% of the functionality. So for in my vision, what I think is that 90% of the functionality that we are providing with the Orchestrator API is not valid for Kubernetes environment. So maybe we can change the API, or we can design as different flows in order to make happy the Kubernetes user. This is my view.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks for all that. And I think the way I would summarize it too is we want every orchestrator to be fully featured. So Ceph ADM, we want fully featured. Rook to be fully featured. And the way they get their features is just fundamentally different. So trying to solve them both with the same API is just proving that it just doesn't work well.
It's not working.
Yeah. There may be some really simple operations that maybe we could keep in the Orchestrator API and keep a Rook module if it's really simple to maintain, right? But for most operations, if we treat them differently, and the dashboard might need to have a different experience, and things like that. So
even the for example, well, Jeff has started. Sorry, Jeff has shared with me an old document, about 2 years old document about some flow. I'm going to share. I think that here. It's about, well, there is a part that is talking about a flow of OST creations.
One me, that's the downstream doc. I wouldn't share it right now, I think. Please get rid of the chat. That's why I want to know. Is it upstream or downstream? Yeah, we're walking a fine line here, so nix it. Mike, don't look at it.
Okay, well, it's not allowed the access to upstream users, so no problem. Okay, but in any case,
are you sure?
Yes. in the chat is only the link. Okay, but well, what I'm saying is that the workflow that in this case is OpenShift people is suggesting is completely different from the flow that we follow in order to create OSDs in Ceph ADM with bare metal infrastructure. So this is a good example of what I'm saying. Okay, that if we want to go ahead with that, probably we need to be focused in what are the things that a Rook user could be well happy to find in order to create clusters, okay, and how to add the Kubernetes cluster user to create the Ceph cluster CRD. Help in this area, and the other part is just to provide things that make easy the day 2 operations in Kubernetes clusters. And I think that probably this is going to provide us to define a completely different API from the Orchestrator API. Even if we use a manager module in order to provide this functionality, I think that we cannot call this manager module Orchestrator, because we are not going to have the functionality that an orchestrator can provide.
If, let me just throw out, my thought process very abstractly. If we want to deploy a product on bare metal versus cloud, so this is a cloud versus bare metal. I think a lot of what we're talking about is probably cloud-based. A lot of the workflows don't make a heck of a lot of sense. I agree 100%. But if someone wants to deploy a product on Kubernetes on bare metal, which again, upstream community, a standalone product on bare metal, with Kubernetes is probably questionable. I'm not sure if the market will transition. If it does, then would they want the ability to control, the kind of level of drive, configurations that we do today in the standard dashboard environment? I would think the answer would be yes, in my opinion. And, I think we're seeing an example of that with something else that is showing that that is a desire. So that's all. I mean, so Travis, what do you think of that? Is that, something we should, how does your thought process, work between those two? Are you thinking the same for both, or are you thinking more from a cloud deploy perspective?
Right. Well, I mean, ideally, I definitely agree that, whether you're in Rook or wherever using the Ceph dashboard, you'd like your experience to be in the UI. People like the UI better than command line or YAML files or whatever, for sure. To me, it's more of maybe a resource question. Like, do we have resources to dedicate to this to make it a good experience in the dashboard and interface well with Rook and design it around Rook? Because I think we have to design it around Rook instead of saying Ceph ADM and Rook will look the same, right?
Yeah.
And so
And that was our ultimate goal, and that's why we had that Rook manager to be compatible with. I had someone over there working on it until we had another priority. We had to move them off for a little bit. I always intended to move someone back. I mean, so it's like I think it's and that's the reason why for these kinds of environments, right? I mean, and if we forget them now, we forget that tool now, then I think we have a problem, picking that up in the future. But
yeah. And another point I was going to bring up, here's a link to the Ceph docs that show the comparison of Rook to Ceph ADM with the orchestrator. And it just, I mean, even though Rook and Ceph ADM are both what I would call fully featured, like the Rook column just like looks like it doesn't work, right? So just because it doesn't, a lot of those don't apply. I'd like to fix the docs as a first step to stop comparing them side by side, or tell people to do things differently with Rook or something. But
yes,
but yeah,
I think the not applicable icon seems like it's broken. I will change
exactly.
that icon.
Yeah, if we just change the red X to an NA, maybe that will help.
Yeah, I think it will be better.
Well, but it is equated to an NA down below, so
yeah.
It requires a level of abstraction and interpretation.
Mm-hmm. And there's like the not implemented yet. Well, we're probably never going to implement some of them because they're really not applicable or whatever. So.
Or maybe even remove completely the column for Rook. Okay, if we reach the conclusion or we accept that the Rook Manager module is not an orchestrator, is a provider of functionality of the Rook operator, that is a completely different thing. Probably it has no sense to have this column here, because what this table, initially this table was thought in order to compare the different orchestrators, Ceph ADM, Ansible, SSH. It was a SALT, I think that for SUSE, okay, it was several tools in order to install Ceph clusters in bare metal environments. But at the end, the only orchestrator available is Ceph ADM. And what we are comparing is Rook, something that we wanted to become an orchestrator, that is the Rook Manager module. We are trying to compare this with Ceph ADM. And the problem is that Rook, we cannot use the same API for managing the Rook operator, Ceph cluster in Kubernetes, that we are using for Ceph ADM. So this table, I think that is completely wrong, because both things are not comparable.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Should one of the first steps be to start kind of looking at the functionality group by group and saying, hey, this actually works for both. This bucket, maybe if you're talking bare metal and disks. This bucket, service management, maybe that doesn't work. kind of trying to group it into like areas of functionality.
Go
And
ahead.
maybe another question is does it make sense to document the Rook approach in the Ceph docs, or should we just point people to the Rook docs to say this is how you do things in Rook?
I think that we can illustrate that with an example. Okay, for example, you can see that we have a row that is working in Rook and in Ceph ADM that is IP mon. That is to change the number of monitors that we have in the cluster. I think that nobody is going to change this configuration using the orchestrator. The thing, Kubernetes, the Rook operator users, what they are going to do is to change the cluster CRD or to patch the cluster CRD. But they are not going to do the operation using apply mon from the orchestrator, because they are going to lose the control and they are going to to have no idea about what is the configuration of monitors in the Rook cluster. So this is not not the right thing to do, because I think that we are providing a functionality that, okay, is doing the functionality, but is doing the functionality in the way that nobody wants. This is one of the major problems.
Seems to me like the use case, I mean, talking out of the ignorance, seems to me like the use case in the Kubernetes environment is very different from the bare metal. And we are trying like to imitate the same support on Ceph ADM on the Rook side, when sometimes it doesn't make even, it has no sense. Is that what you want to mean?
Mm-hmm.
The
It's just very different.
Yeah.
But this is where I'd ask a question.
Yeah.
In the long run, if people want to deploy standalone products in Kubernetes, is it missing functionality that they need in the long run for, the drive caching, all the, SSDs, NVMEs for this, SSDs for this, tiering? I would think yes. So is Rook going to be deployed on bare metal? Kubernetes on Rook, with Rook on bare metal. If it is, and we want to have a standalone product built on that in the future, then would it need that control? That's a fundamental question. And if it does need that level of control, do we need the things that we're dismissing today as not needed?
Right, and saying it's not needed maybe in the orchestrator interface, right? As long as there's a way to do it in Rook, like with CRDs.
But when you get to that level, typically we want to control it from a management perspective. So typically you'll need an API to do that. We'll have to come through this API. That was the intent, right? I mean, so does that make sense?
Right. The problem, Jeff, is that for the moment, users in Kubernetes environments, they want to do the things using CRDs, okay, and YAML files in order to configure or to deploy.
Because they're deploying on cloud and they don't need that level of control. They don't have to configure, they don't have to, optimize their deployments. If we're going to get there and we need to get there, then taking this away is not going to allow that. We'll need another mechanism to do it. We have something today. The intent was that. That's all I'm saying. I mean, am I missing something? I mean, wasn't that what it was all about?
When you say taking something away, taking away that it works from the dashboard?
Yeah, because you're going to want users to be able to configure and control, or they're going to want to go through, the CLI. The CLI will still need some type of, API as well, and so is it that same API, like it uses, Ceph ADM today? Correct me if I'm wrong. The CLI goes through that manager as well, correct? So it's like, so it's. I'm just saying. I mean, do we want to? I'm just bringing up that point. We aren't there. Will we get there? I'd say yes. That was some desires around that, and I think the upstream will get there eventually. So when they do, then we'll have to reinvent this. I mean, that's, so I don't know. That's my 2 cents. I'll shut up.
Well, and I mean, another thought on how to think about this too is that when the dashboard needs to communicate with Rook to set desired state or modify CRs, then yeah, it probably makes sense to have a module that is implemented that talks to Kubernetes, that creates CRs, that creates that desired state to go configure whatever about Rook and stuff. So, but then as far as CLI, I don't think we'd want to document the CLI in the Rook docs, even if it's available, just because we would tell people to go use the CRDs directly instead. Like, why would we tell them to go use the toolbox to do this if they can just do it with the CRDs and have more control over it that way? But for dashboard integration, the manager modules, I would say, still are the right way to go, so that the dashboard doesn't have to worry about Kubernetes implementation, right? Whether it's an Orchestrator API or something that's specific to a Rook only module that doesn't apply to Ceph ADM in that case, even that's, I guess, an implementation detail that might or might not be in a common API. I don't know, does that make sense?
I mean, at least from the point of view of dashboard, I think the API that we should provide, I mean, not the API, the interface that we should provide to the user should be the same. We shouldn't like be providing different functionality for Ceph if you have Kubernetes as like a deployment or bare metal, because that would be very confusing to use the same interface and end up with a different behavior, depending if you are deploying on bare metal or if you are deploying Kubernetes.
Well,
I think what Juan Miguel and I are saying is that since they are very different platforms, bare metal or Kubernetes, the UX around it will fundamentally need to be different sometimes. It's not always going to be the same UX. Like how to configure nodes, like if you want to configure nodes in Kubernetes, well, you need to go to the Kubernetes dashboard, and why would we expose nodes even at all in the Ceph dashboard or node configuration, for example? Maybe it makes sense. I don't know. But
so, like for example, if you want to add the new OSDs, this is a different operation if you have Kubernetes as if you have bare metal, or
for adding
different
OSDs.
operations. Yeah, for example, something very basic.
Right. And adding OSDs in Kubernetes, our preferred approach is that you'd create Kubernetes PVCs and PVs, and it's dynamically provisioned in a cloud environment, or you have to identify which disks and statically provision your PVs for bare metal, really.
Is this something that we can manage like behind the scenes, like to hide it from the user, so the user shouldn't care about if we are using bare metal or Kubernetes to do this operation?
But we cannot do that, okay? We can try to make things easy. But one of the things that is important, okay, and I think that the final user is completely aware of that, okay? It's about what is the environment that you have, okay? For example, you can implement a steering wheel, okay? And the steering wheel is the same in a car and in a boat, okay? But obviously, the people that is driving the vehicle is completely aware that he's
no, I understand. I'm thinking on the thing from the point of view not only of the user, but the implication for us. Imagine that like you have to create a different documentation for everything that has to do with Rook and have like a parallel documentation, and that means like documentation, training, and everything will be different for bare metal. So if we can have like the same interface for both products, regardless of the deployment environment, bare metal of Kubernetes, that would be very good for us, at least, not only for the user.
That has been our aim in the last 3 years, at least, okay? At the end, what we have seen, or at least what I I have seen, okay,
in
and
practice.
I think that we have practice demonstration about what has happened, okay, that it's not the same. We need to do the things in different way. We cannot use the same orchestrator API that is thinking that you have
I'm
a
not.
parameter.
I'm not talking about like the implementation details. I'm talking about like the interface you provide to the user. If we have to do things differently, like behind the scenes to make it behave similar, then that would be more work for us in the implementation, but less work for us in the long term from the maintenance point of view.
Yes,
From
but not all
documentation,
the
training.
operations that you need in a bare metal environment are needed in the Kubernetes environment. For example, what we have commented about the day one operation, installation of the cluster. In order to install the cluster with Ceph EDM, you have a lot of steps in order to include, to add nodes, to prepare the nodes, to install Ceph EDM, and to start to create the first monitor, first manager, and after that, all the rest of the daemons. In the Kubernetes cluster, this is completely different. It's only one file that is with all the definition of all the cluster. What do you want to have in the cluster? And you apply that file, that CRT. So it's very different the day one operations that we have in a bare metal, pure bare metal environment and in a Kubernetes environment. So all the operations that we have for this use case are not valid in Kubernetes environments.
I see. So my question, I'm always asking out of ignorance because, as you know, I've only been for a month. So couldn't we like deploy the dashboard and use it as the main configuration, at least for the basic stuff, and then have like the command line for more advanced configurations, and use this both for bare metal and for Kubernetes? I mean, like in order to deploy a cluster, it should be the same both for both environments. And if you have to do something more advanced, then okay, you can go to the command line and use Ceph ADM or whatever you provide in Rook to do that. Is this something possible? I'm asking.
Even that day one, just deploying your cluster, even to bring the dashboard up, there are options you'd have in Kubernetes that you don't have in Ceph ADM, like specifically creating PVCs. Do you want to run your storage on some dynamically provisioned storage behind? Like if you're running in the cloud, just tell us the name of the storage class, which is only a Kubernetes concept, right? And if you tell us the storage class, then we'll go provision the storage for Mons and OSDs on that. And then you don't even need, it's not bare metal. There's no disks, just statically available. Like they're dynamically provisioned. That specific scenario is very unique to the Kubernetes cloud. And that pattern also applies to bare metal with Kubernetes. You just have a different storage class and PV provider.
I mean, like if we can have like this different specific stuff like isolated and well documented, like in the dashboard. Okay, so if you're installing for Kubernetes, for Rook, so we have like some new functionality in the dashboard that you can use. But the other functionality is the same for both environment. I mean, this is okay. But have something different and it's well documented. The users who use this functionality will go there and use it, and the other users shouldn't care about it because they will just not use it, or they will not see it in the dashboard because we are not deploying in Kubernetes. That's okay.
The problem is that the flow is completely different, and what a Kubernetes user expects, my view, is completely different of what we have in this moment in the dashboard. In order to creation of the cluster, when we are talking about creation of the cluster, for other operations, for example, user management, or you want to create to the data pool, okay, or this kind of things, I think that it is exactly the same, okay? We can do exactly the same flow, but for day one operations, the flow is completely different. And if, for example, for creating OSDs, what is expected in a Kubernetes environment is to have a possibility to define or to use storage class, storage classes. Okay, and this is something that if you do not provide this possibility to the final user, the final user is going to be completely confused about what is doing the dashboard in order to create OSD. Okay, so in the case of creation of OSDs and deploying of the FIS
Services,
cluster, the startup cluster, okay, and even creation of services, what is the configuration of the cluster? I think that the flows are very different, and probably we will need to change also the look and feel that we have in the dashboard in order to make it more friendly for Kubernetes users and to understand better what is happening. Okay, this does not mean maybe. Well, I think that probably we are going to share. I think 40% of the Orchestrator's API in the Rook Manager module and in the Ceph ADM module. But the problem that we have, I think that one of the biggest problems that we have until this moment is that we have tried to follow in a very rigid way the Orchestrator API and to apply this API to
use it in Rook. To use it in Rook. I see.
This is not applicable. Okay, probably we can reuse part. Okay, and we can use the same. Okay, it's going to be 50%, but for day one use cases, it's not applicable.
Well, we have to look at the desired workflows, what we're trying to accomplish. You keep saying, no on day one, but I think we still have to look at that, what it means, when we're deploying Kubernetes on bare metal, what kind of control do you want from a drive selection perspective and, resource perspective. We don't have, that today probably, well, we do, I guess, but in a different form, not through the dashboard. So again, we also have to decide what is our management strategy if we go this route with that. These are all the questions we've had. We don't really have answers. We had a filler here, and we got to figure out what those answers are. And we got to, so.
Yeah. Or even using the dashboard, Jeff, but doing in the dashboard the things in a different way.
Great. So, we have a lot of, So is it premature to, go change what we have, or just wait till these things evolve a little bit more? No harm, no foul. It's not, if it's not, no one's calling it, dashboard is the only thing that's calling it. At this point, does it confuse people? It could. That's something that's hanging out there.
And again, I think in an ideal world, the dashboard would be able to do everything with Rook 2. But in reality, I'd say let's prioritize what scenarios are important to Rook users from the dashboard. And I'd say if day 2 experiences monitoring and some basic configuration, that's day 2. And then as a lower priority, it'd be nice to get to day 1 someday, but maybe just maybe we won't get there, maybe or maybe we will.
Yeah, I agree.
And in general, we never could make it like not. I'm not talking about the implementation. I'm talking about like the user experience from the outside. Whenever we make it more similar, the usage for both scenarios, it will save us more time for everything, for documentation, for training, for people like transitioning from bare metal to the Kubernetes. Like if we make it similar, then the users, if we ask them at some point, like, okay, now it is more recommendable like to use Kubernetes, then it will be more easy for them to go and use the new environment because they don't have like to change their mind, to change their tools, change the interface, change everything they are already used to, and to start like using something newly. Because whenever the users, whenever there is some change in interface, the user normally starts like claiming about everything that is new. So whenever we make it easy for the user, that would be good for us. And good for everybody.
I think
If
what we have seen with Rook Upstream is that that's like that is the intention behind why the Orchestrator module was developed, but that is not the case of the real world. People who are on Kubernetes don't take a Ceph storage specific viewpoint on their storage. They take a Kubernetes centric view of their Kubernetes cluster, and storage is only a small part of it. So like the Orchestrator is a very Ceph focused like piece of design, but in the Kubernetes world, people don't really want that. We have found like for day 2 operations, like those things are helpful, but for deployment, like for actually modifying like the CRDs, they use Kubernetes tooling for that. So like I think we have to like really consider like what are the users who are actually benefiting from the sentiment of a storage specific like similarity there, and like are there enough of those users for us to really put in the effort?
Yeah, and
like that.
And that question goes right back to where does the businesses go? Because it's an upstream conversation. Where do they want to go? Do they want to, have a replacement of their, standalone products with this technology? If they do they still need the same levels of control? I think we're way ahead of that probably, but I mean, at some point we'll probably get there. It's
and in terms of like business, what are like the alternatives to Ceph in Kubernetes right now? Is there like some similar product that's already offering storage and the users are using to it something standard? I'm asking because I don't know.
There's not a lot of like standard things. There are, I'm sure Travis also like can remember some names. The big one I can think of is Rancher's Longhorn. I think that's what it's called, Longhorn, which is a block only storage. There's also like Minio for I think object storage.
Yes.
And there's like CockroachDB for like there are several databases, I think, and then there are some closed source block solutions as well.
Yeah, there's lots of competitors for sure. For deploying Ceph in Kubernetes, though, I mean, Rook is the way to do that.
I was asking basically like if there is already like a big competitor on this area, we can just like at least try to make Ceph in the usage similar to what they have from the dashboard point of view. This way, if the users transition at some point to Ceph, it will be much easier for them. Like to use the same thing Podman people do with Docker. You just provided the same interface. So if you want to transition, you don't have even to know the main page. You just put an alias and you are good to go. So, but if there is no competitor in this area, then we have more freedom in at least like design how the users will use the storage in this kind of environments.
Well, there's lots of competitors in the storage space for sure, but I don't think there's one or there's no like common standard.
Like big one. Yeah.
Every storage system is managed in a unique way, so I don't think there's a standard there.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of the point of the whole custom resource thing to begin with, which is like no one's going to be exactly the same. The Kubernetes people have realized that, and now it's like, okay, you can define your own custom resource definitions to fit your use cases. There's the standard interfaces for things like PV, PVC, that covers the stuff that is expected to interoperate, and then you're left to do whatever you want your resources.
Okay.
I just be curious, Michael. I mean, SUSE, what does SUSE talk about when they discuss these things? From an upstream perspective.
Most of these things are driven through Longhorn, which is block-based storage in Kubernetes.
Okay. By your level of control, is it very, are you looking at, those really tight levels of control where you're allocating things, or is it, are you doing it from a Kubernetes current method? Are you thinking of other things? I mean, I'm just curious if what you could talk about, if anything.
So most of the current paradigm is there's a project called Harvester that's kind of interesting to look at, and they deploy things from a Rancher catalog, which is like a Helm chart based thing. So
yeah, totally different.
Yeah, totally different.
Okay. But probably more analogous to, the CRDs, I would think, than what we're talking about.
The underlying theme becomes that, yeah.
Yeah.
It'll do deployments and just Kubernetes type native things to deploy Longhorn. There's another project going on, I think Aquarium, that you've seen, and that's investigating how we can better integrate Ceph with some of these Kubernetes-based things, but that's pretty early in development.
Okay. Interesting to see what they think as well. I mean, yeah, still the same people on it. We could chat with them if need be.
Yep, a lot of the same people. So.
Okay, good.
Michael, the Aquarium people has started to think about the integration of Longhorn installations in Aquarium?
No, they are in different spaces. So Longhorn provides block-based storage, and Ceph is a totally different thing. Aquarium is Ceph-based, more of a Ceph ADM-based thing.
Okay, but in any case, they will. Well, if they decide to use Ceph in Kubernetes, probably I think that they are going to use the rook operator.
No, not necessarily. We don't really. We have a little bit of that from the old SES, SUSE Enterprise Storage-based deployments.
Yeah.
But most everything's driven to Longhorn now. Longhorn-based deployments.
Okay. Thanks.
Sort of get us back, I guess, on track with this discussion. So I know we have this common API here, the Orchestrator one, and there's some issues with it between Rook and Ceph ADM, and they want different things. So I think the sort of important thing, which I think was brought up earlier, is sort of finding who actually needs this and what do they need to work in between the common things. I know off the top of my head, it's mostly just the dashboards that I'm worried about when we talk about this common API. I think it seems like there's not a ton of crossover in users from Kubernetes clusters to the bare metal clusters right now, anyway. Kind of why I was hoping there would be someone from the dashboard here. We don't have anyone here right now. And basically thinking about how deprecating this could affect them. But I also know there's an issue, I don't know the details of it, with something with consistency between making changes in the dashboard and making changes with the CRDs directly in Rook. That might make it so we don't even want the dashboard to be allowed to make those sort of changes, and maybe just some sort of read-only system there. I think that's also another discussion that would have to be had with dashboard people. I don't know. I mean, from my point of view, if Rook really feels like there's not enough sort of common operations that we want this API to sort of be between us, and we can get it in a state where the dashboard's happy with it, then we really have no reason to sort of worry about Manager Rook. That's my viewpoint, basically. Again, I just feel like we need the dashboard people and make a sort of final decision on this. I think they're the main people who would be affected by having or not having a common API. I don't know anyone else.
And I think that, yeah, I mean, agreed. I don't want, and I think it's all about what makes sense for the dashboard in Rook scenarios, and so that's really the long-term discussion to have. What do we want to focus on in the dashboard for Rook? And And I would say day 2 scenarios have higher priority, and day 1 we even potentially take off the table for now, but we need to talk with dashboard folks.
Yes, I think exactly the same, Travis.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and
We
I feel like
focus
that's,
it. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I feel like we just need to sort of have a discussion with the dashboard people and the Rook people and sort of what could be able to be done, the dashboard in like a Kubernetes environment, and then once we know those things, we can more clearly define what a common API would maybe need to be able to do. And other than that, I don't. If like Rook it's easier to use without the Orchestrator API, then I don't see any reason to support all these extra things the dashboard also doesn't need. As there's not a lot of crossover users. So there's no reason to have a common API unless the dashboard needs it for something. So to just talk with them and figure that out in between the Rook and the dashboard team.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk to our product managers as well from a downstream perspective, and and I'll get their opinions on this as well. So,
Okay.
where do we want to be? Where's the puck going to be? And for 4 quarters. So,
And this is a long-term vision, I guess, to figure out too. We're not going to answer all the questions in one meeting or even 2 or 3. But yep, it's a journey.
agreed. I do think we're all on the same page and understanding anyway. So it's yeah. I think our ideas of where we want to go. Maybe yours and mine are different, Travis, but you got the advantage. You're implementing.
Yeah. Code is king. That's an expression
Exactly.
learned long ago. Yeah. All right. Well, sounds good for now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're at a good spot, and until we have more discussions on the long-term plans for the dashboard.
Yeah, we need the dashboard team also to be involved. To know from them what is their opinion basically.
Actually, do dashboard folks ever attend this meeting, or should we just call it a separate meeting?
Well, I'd have to say that I'm probably a dashboard guy, So.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know the code. I have an opinion. You can probably tell what my opinion is, and but anyway, because I'm thinking about where we need to be, and I don't think everyone's there, and and I don't think we will be there until it falls in our lap. But that's just a differing opinion as well. So.
Right. Well, maybe better phrased is who are the dashboard folks we need to.
Ernesto, the people that own the code, just like you, they own they're in control. So.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah, they do attend. They've been here before, but obviously they're not here this week.
Yep.
So maybe we have to organize a separate meeting, mostly between the dashboard and the Rook team, and I guess some people from Ceph VM team should also be there. That's relevant, Orchestrator, to talk about this specifically.
Okay. Yeah, I'll schedule something separate.
All right. Thanks. Okay. Is there anything else we want to go into in this topic for today? Or is everybody in a good spot here?
That's a great conversation. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. There was one other topic I had on the agenda. There's only 5 minutes, so I think it's not long enough to go into it. Does anybody have anything quick they want to sort of bring up here before we end the meeting out? All right, in that case, thanks everyone for coming, and see whoever wants to show up next week. We'll see you next week. Bye.
All right, thanks. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.